recording whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Carlisle, and this is the Carlisle Show, and I'd like to welcome Liz Pepple, who is a self-employed licensed psychotherapist. Welcome, Liz.
Well, thank you, Carlisle. It's a great opportunity to get to talk about something that's very important in my practice, and also because of this ongoing interest that I've had for over the last 30 to 40 years about the well-being of family and children and adolescents.
And what Liz and I will be talking about today is suicide. We will talk about suicide from the perspective of the famous people who have unfortunately committed suicide, but we'll also talk about it from the standpoint of what brought them there and how, if they could do it over again, would they change what they did. Mm-hmm. So Liz, you had talked earlier about the amount of people who have committed suicide, and the numbers seem to be growing.
I think, Carlisle, people don't realize, maybe it's because of the stigma that's attached to mental illness. I don't think people have any concept of the number of people who actually contemplate and try to carry forth with a plan. It is not just a small amount of people. We are talking epidemic proportions. There are more people who die from suicide than cancer, than cardiac problems, and that's just looking at the larger population. Every 10 seconds, someone attempts to suicide. Last year, there were 38,000 people who died from suicide. And this is true universally, not just in the United States, not just sleepy little Canada where everybody's, really cool and happy, but China has the biggest population of suicide. Mm. And it is preventable.
One of the things to think about is not just a stereotypical person who committed suicide, but it's a broad swath of demographics.
Certainly. Suicide doesn't just visit poor white or black people. Suicide is a scourge that afflicts any socioeconomic level, male, female, young people, children. Children as young as 2 have attempted to commit suicide, and some have succeeded.
So why is it that we don't talk about it that much, that at a certain point in the media, we learn how the person did it, but it seems like, well, that's the end of the story, and let's go on to chapter 2.
I think people are genuinely afraid of their own feelings about suicide. If you look at it in the backdrop of a religious background, most religions, like Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, Islam, condemned at one point or another suicide. So it was totally anathema that anyone would want to choose to take their lives. The social stigma was further expanded after the death of that person. They were not allowed to be buried in sacred ground. Their property was seized. They would be brought through the marketplace and have a stake put through their heart. That was a law in England until 1838. Up until the 1950s, it was a felony to attempt suicide in a state like Georgia, Kentucky. But I think people don't realize or want to realize that the possibility or the thinking of suicide, depending upon the stressors, all of us go through life with having our resiliency tested. And what may put me out of balance may not be the same thing that would get you off kilter. So some of the things that would make people start thinking about how I would be better off in this world if I weren't here. Some of the changes that happen, say if a dear, precious loved one dies, or for men especially, if a job loss, or a series of job losses, or great financial loss, or illness like a sudden diagnosis of cancer,
Well, you had also talked, Liz, about the epidemic proportion of vets who are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and committing suicide.
With the last two wars, and again, war is such an ambiguous, sensitive issue. I think about the young men and women who come back, not like the combat of World War II, where it was valor, it was you were morally supported and loved for doing your duty.
And had parades.
Oh, the big parades, ticker tape parades. I mean, what's the classic, the photo of the soldier who came home with the beautiful nurse.
Her leg kicking up.
Yeah, kicking her foot up. You know, the war was comparable to the ecstasy of a passionate kiss. But the young people who are coming home today aren't supported. Yes, they may get, you know, the pat on the shoulder, you did a great job, we're proud of you, but they are in such a state of trauma, of panic, persistent trauma. It's more akin to World War I, when soldiers, when infantrymen were in the trenches, and there was the constant bombardment of bombs going off. So that trauma, that panic, irritability, they can never get away from it. They can't escape it.
But if we were to understand at a certain point, not that we could totally understand, but if we were to understand what trauma is like and how it affects our men and women, then wouldn't we be in a better position to help them?
Of course, understanding and knowledge and research is always what helps in order to eradicate an illness. And this is a physical illness. Of course, it's got its overlay in the brain, but it is still a physical illness. I think we would make great strides in humanizing the characteristics of mental illness, to put it on par with diabetes or coronary insufficiency. If we can get over the stigma, or if we can get over our own fear of, you know, I am here, I am present today, and there will be a time in my life that I will not be alive. So I think people are afraid, especially in this consumer-driven society where there's immediate gratification with social media. I think things like the examined life, I don't think the examined life is lived as carefully, as delicately.
Well, we're going to examine the physical part of the mental illness, the physical and the mental, in our next segment, and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
What can just $1 buy? A dollar can go a long way, so imagine what 10 could do. Item donations distract the relief effort and can cost more to ship than what they are actually worth. So stop sending canned goods and start sending cash, because just $1 can make all the difference.
Okay, we're back again, talking with Liz Pepple about suicide. We talked in our first segment about the stigmas attached with suicide in the society. And now we're going to talk about the physical signs that one might see if one were to be on the pathway of committing suicide. So Liz, do you want to tell us what some of those messages are?
This is, you know, what's funny, Carlisle, if you work with clients and sometimes funny puns jump through your head, and I'm just sitting here saying to myself, I wonder how I'll just jump off this point right now. Because I'm thinking about, you know, the visual that's in my head is, you know, someone jumping off a rooftop. So, okay, I am going to jump in with some of the symptoms. When I've worked with young adolescents, some of the things that we look for are giving away of precious possessions, saying goodbye to family members or friends, trying to have another person swear to secrecy if you know about their plan that you won't dare reveal it. One of the most important things to realize, and again I'm going to reveal my bias, that if there is a gun in the house, the chances of that person being successful at committing suicide are twice greater than they would have been had there not been a firearm. Now, that's true in the United States. It's true in America, that is the biggest way in which men and adolescents and adolescent men commit suicide. With women, it's poisoning or hanging. Okay, I want to go back to the symptomology. And
let's go back there.
Let's go back to the symptomology. Some of the other, like the changes that we had spoken about in the first segment, big life changes. But physically, people have erratic sleep patterns, changes in eating style, self-isolation. So those are some of the physical symptoms. Psychologically, what you see or what I hear from people are this, like people say to me, how do you explain what that pain is like? Well, I think of cancer patients that I've worked with in hospice, and they will tell me about the bone-aching, excruciating, just ache that cancer presents. But with suicide ideation or with feelings of acute distress, the pain is almost, I guess I could call it a soul vice, that you are in such inexplicable, intractable, harrowing pain that, and you only think in the moment, your cognition is such that you can't think ahead. But the people who are experiencing this think to themselves, it's hopeless, it's never going to get better, and I'm a hot mess, and I don't deserve to be around my loved ones. I am a burden. I am useless.
Okay, so they feel that way, and it can be a feeling that they just experience in one day and then it happens, or a long period of time. Is there a time frame when those around those in need to look at their friends, their partners, whomever, and say, is there some way I can help you? Promise me you'll talk to me if you think about this path.
Time frame can be, and it's all very individualistic, a week, a month. There can be people who sit for a year and ponder this. Again, it depends upon how active a personality you are. Some adolescents are very proactive about their own suicide. And with that mix of impulsivity, impetuosity that adolescents manifest, then it may be more, it might be a quicker demise. Now, it's interesting about how one's activity level gets triggered. Sometimes when you're starting on medication, and there are two things that work really well. The proper first, the proper diagnosis. The second is the right medication, and that being married with the a fit of a psychotherapist who's using cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you get all those three things on board, you have a great chance of success.
Okay, but let's go back for 1 second, step back to what you were talking about. I thought, well, if someone is really down and they're not expressing themselves and they're in an isolated pattern, then that would be the point where they might commit suicide. And yet you told me just the opposite.
That there may not be enough of an energy level to get them going. Sometimes it takes just a little bit of, I remember sitting in school, in graduate school, talking about how you had to be aware, not that first moment when they come in to do therapy with you, but when their system gets a little more activated, they get a little more energy, they're not just numb in that horrible, the body feeling numb, but the brain being in that awful grief spot. It's the day or two or the week, because sometimes psychotropic medication doesn't kick in for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. So that first month and a half is when I advise family members and friends to be most vigilant, not to leave people alone.
And that numbness is an interesting phenomenon, because you think, well, they're numb, so they must not be feeling.
They are feeling exquisitely numb to the reality of what a precious and wonderful person they are. And one of the best examples of women whose writing is so spot on, Kay Redfield Jameson, who's a professor at Johns Hopkins University, she writes at length about her own suicide attempt, and she also has written about suicide. And just recently, with the death of her husband, she wrote about grief, comparing and contrasting how grief can have some components of depression.
Kay was in school and her boyfriend committed suicide, and then that triggered her wanting to commit suicide?
They had both agreed when they were, I don't know if they were at Davis or UCLA, but they agreed that they had a suicide pact in that they would not commit suicide, that all the other had to do was phone, and they would get on the plane and meet and sit in vigil with each other for a week and just be present to each other. Now, Kay survived. He did not. And it was she said in one of the YouTube videos that I was watching this morning, she said what made a difference for him was that there was a loaded firearm in his Cape Cod bungalow. She was a marksman, but she knew to remove the gun and the ammunition from the house.
That's interesting. Yeah, so it's really good that we're bringing this out. I think just that one little thing could help immensely in heightening the awareness of what could happen and what might not happen if you took away certain things in the house. So we'll be right back. Stay with us, and we're going to be talking more. Liz.
Here at PSAID, we come together to help and support those who are affected by disasters around the world. We also know there are those who wish to make their own contributions. However, what others don't realize is the way they donate can make a difference. One factor is the additional cost of shipping. Another is whether the donation meets the necessities of those in need. So next time, please make your donations count. Donate cash.
Okay, so we're back. This is the Carlisle Show, and Liz Pepple and I have been talking about suicide. We talked a lot about what might lead someone to suicide and the physical and mental states, but let's talk about some of the people that we know and maybe get from them some signs, or at least how they committed suicide. So one of them I would like to bring up is Anderson Cooper's brother who committed suicide. He jumped out of a window and his mother was there. That in and of itself, the mother's grief.
We're mothers ourselves, and I cannot imagine. I can't imagine that pain that Gloria Vanderbilt felt at that moment. And prior to, she probably did everything in her mother's repertoire to keep him intact. Now, what I've read over and over in the different journals or different books and heard from different clients that I've had over the years, people really don't want to die. If there were some sort of comatose, unconscious, preconscious state, Michael Crichton, he was on to something. If there could be some state in which people could be anesthetized, that they could get over that pervasive.
Well,
Yeah.
this reminds me of Philip Seymour Hoffman, that in effect, in his taking heroin, if someone had known and had timely given him the medication that would have allowed him to have that respiratory thing working, then he would have lived. So your analogy is there, that if in fact we could somehow construct a situation where, as you said earlier, it's that point that they commit suicide. But if they were to work through that point and get to, not necessarily the other side, oh, everything is wonderful, but at least it's transitory. It's not the finality. It can just be, this is a feeling for a certain period of time, but then bingo, let's go someplace else.
That's what's so fascinating about learning about human behavior, that a feeling state is temporary. A feeling state is not the permanency that one thinks it is while you are in the middle of it. And I'm not trying to downgrade or poo-poo anyone's pain. It is intensely, exquisitely poignant. But there has to be, in that therapeutic alliance, that realization that you can get to the other side. You can pull out points of resiliency that you don't even know that you could call forth.
That you have those resources inside that have been untouched, untapped, that could bring you along.
And some of the, and I am a person, 65 years old.
No way.
Oh, yes. And I've been working with families. I guess I worked on a Hopkins psych ward when I was 18, 19 years old. And my first day working as a psych aide, this very prominent psychiatrist hanged himself in the dining room. So that was my introduction, 18 years old, working in a psych ward. And I was terrified. I thought, I can't do this work. I cannot do this work. This is crazy making. I cannot do this. But over the years, being with young adolescents, being with kids, couples, it's incredibly rich, rewarding, anxiety-producing.
I'm sure.
But I'm happy that you and I were talking earlier about spirituality and what is beneficial for people if they can find a community that is really important, not to isolate, and for survivors. The sad thing is that there's twice the incident that a family member, especially a child, would commit suicide than had there not been that suicide in the family. And so religion helps, community helps, a good therapist.
But we haven't talked about the importance of just a telephone call or a conversation. I know I have a friend whose friend was suicidal, and she said, promise me you won't do anything unless you call me, promise me. So not that promises aren't going to be broken, but that interaction of talking to someone might get you through, the other side of it.
And not just a phone call, if you have a friend who, if you know, don't be shy about asking them. You don't have to directly come out and say, do you have a plan and what is it? You could say something a little more empathic, like, I'm really worried about you because You don't seem to be excited about life the way you used to. I know you lost your job, and I know your wife left you a month ago. Have you ever felt so bad that you think you want to end it all? Or are you just feeling like you want to hang it all up? And you can say, I've got 3 hours tonight. I'm not going to the movies. I just want to sit here and be with you. And not only do I want to be with you, but there isn't anything that you can say to me that's going to creep me out. There isn't anything that you can say to me that I'm going to be in judgment of you. One of the things I learned early in my career, and one of my daughters reminded me this the other day, she said, "Mom, don't you remember when that family member committed suicide? You said that was the most selfish thing that person could do." Well, it is and it isn't. It's not selfish. That person thinks they're useless and they just want to be out of pain.
So if we could just talk a little bit about the message that the person who commits suicide leaves or doesn't leave a message, so that the family members or friends are, they're just in a state of, well, I don't even know what kind of state, but their feelings are, how did this happen? Why did it happen? Could I have helped? Certainly one of I might be in the wrong for doing what I didn't do.
Well, I don't think you can ever say that. I don't think you can admonish yourself. If that person has a plan, they'll try to act on it. So if I can in any way help a family that I'm working with to try to absolve them of the guilt, of the horrible pain that they're feeling, and the sadness and the confusion. Now, it's true. I don't know if a suicide note helps, and only 10 to 30% of people leave a suicide note. And the content of a suicide note is interesting. It can be concern for the people that were left behind. It can be a suggestion of how goods and possessions are going to be divided. But the person who commits suicide really believes that they are doing themselves and their loved ones a favor by not being alive or present.
So before we finish out our show, I'd like to have you just underline what someone should do if they feel like their friend or family member is in trouble.
If you think a friend or family member is in trouble, don't keep secrets. Don't promise that you're going to keep a secret. Don't lie in judgment. Don't think that person's going to go to hell. Be as proactive as you can be. Like, some people are more comfortable sitting with a friend and talking for 3 hours. Like you reminded me, the phone call. Drive them to the nearest ER that has an on-call psychiatrist. Remind them about, if you know their belief system, plug into that. Get the hotline. For adolescents, there's an organization in New York. Right now, because I'm 65, I'm forgetting what that organization is. But there are suicide hotlines that are everywhere.
Okay, but I know this is going backwards a little bit here, but I still think it's important. When you have intervention for someone who has drug abuse or alcohol abuse, those people who try to intervene are normally pushed back, real hard back, by the person you're trying to help. Do you think that that would be the case with someone who's going to commit suicide, or they would act differently?
Oh, I think both of those populations are great at secrecy and great at hiding their agenda. But I think it's the nature of any kind of trusting relationship. I can remember telling this 14-year-old boy, if you don't want to talk to me, or if you can't talk to me, if I'm too off-putting or whatever, would you please bring your ferret in a suitcase or in a pillowcase and a little doggy carrier? Bring your pet to therapy and talk to that pet, whatever way you can, or bring the minister, or bring the priest from church, or bring, if there's a little niece or nephew or a new baby in that person's life. Sometimes, I have to tell you about an intervention that I did with a teenage girl. I was at my wit's end, and probably that year, I think I had a caseload of 30 adolescents, and that might have been a bit too much, but that's okay. And I was sitting with this young person, and I thought, okay, paradoxical. Let's try something that she wouldn't be thinking of. I said, okay, you're going to kill yourself? Let's plan the funeral. This is your last social event, honey. What are you going to wear? Dress is the most important, long, short. Don't worry about the heels. Nobody's going to see them. You're going to be in the casket. Just the top is open. Let's talk about makeup. Tiara. Going to do tiara. Flowers. Gardenias. You're dramatic. Of course we'll have gardenias. Music. What's music we're going to have? And do you want your parents sitting up front? Would you rather that they be in the back? So she was
blown away.
Well, she was pissed. She was really pissed. And it worked. She's still alive.
Thank God, Liz.
Well, well, you and I are God believers, and the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, came in my ear and told me what to do. But
well, we have covered a lot of things here today, and I think that your words of wisdom and your encouragement and your experiences have helped and opened the minds, I hope, of our listeners. And I thank you very much, Liz, for being here today on our show.
And I thank you, Carlisle.
Okay, we'll see you again.
Okay.